The wind off the moor smelled of wet heather and old rain, and it pressed against the windows of Thornley Hall like a thing that wanted in. Inside the great drawing-room, a fire burned low in the grate, but the warmth did not reach the corners. The corners were where Maren Ashford stood. She had a glass of weak punch in her hand that she had not tasted. She had been holding it for an hour. The room was full of voices, and none of them were speaking to her. She was not ugly. She knew this in a plain, quiet way, the way one knows the color of one's own hair. Her gown was 3 seasons old but well kept. Her gloves were clean. Her hair had been pinned by her own hands that morning, and it had stayed where she put it, which was more than most things in her life had done. She watched the candle wax run down a brass holder on the side table. A small bead of it dropped onto the polished wood and began to harden. She watched it harden. This was the kind of thing she watched now. Across the room, her cousin Petra Ashford laughed at something a tall young man had said. Petra's laugh was a bell. It was the laugh that filled rooms. Maren had heard that laugh since they were both small girls in the schoolroom at the parsonage, and she had learned over many years that the laugh was a tool, the way a hammer is a tool, and Petra was very good at hammering. Petra was the daughter of the house. Maren was the niece who lived there because there was nowhere else for her to go. Her mother had been the elder sister and the poorer one, and Maren's father had died at sea 5 years before, and the small money he had left had been swallowed by the lawyers in 2 summers. So she lived at Thornley. She was a poor relation. She knew what that meant. She set the punch down on a side table behind a vase. She would not be drinking it. She slid her left glove down a 1/4 inch and slid it back up. She had been doing this for half an hour. It was a small, private thing. Nobody could see it. The gloves were too long at the wrist, and adjusting them gave her something to do with her hands. She had counted 31 ceiling roses in the room above her. She had counted the panes in the long west windows. She had read the same page of a book of sermons that morning 4 times. These were the things that held her together when she had to stand in a room and pretend she did not feel her own quietness like a weight on her chest. The big oak doors at the far end of the room opened. A footman stepped in and spoke a name. Maren did not catch it. The voices in the room shifted in a way she had learned to feel without looking up. The shift meant that someone important had come in. She looked up the way one looks up at thunder. The man in the doorway was not handsome in the way that the gentlemen of the county were handsome. He was not tall in a soft, polished way. He took up space without trying. His coat was dark and well cut. His hair was the color of wet bark, and one piece of it had fallen across his brow because he had not bothered to push it back. His mouth was set in a line that was neither cold nor warm. His eyes moved across the room once, slowly, and Maren felt every servant in the room change their posture. The maid by the wine table straightened her shoulders. The footman at the door pressed his back a little flatter against the wall. None of them looked afraid. They looked like people who had been waiting to remember how to stand. Maren did not know who he was. She had never seen him before, but she had heard the name now, somewhere in the back of her ear, where her cousin's voice had hissed it. The Duke of Caverley. He had bought the great house at Brindale, 6 miles south, last spring. He never came to county parties. He had come to this one. Petra moved. Maren watched her cousin glide across the room with the steady purpose of a ship under sail. Petra had been positioned, with her 2 younger sisters, in a careful arc near the fireplace where the light was kindest. Their mother, Lady Ashford, stood behind them like a general behind a line of cannon. The Duke would walk past them, the line, and he would have to speak to one of them. And Lady Ashford had planned this. Maren had heard her plan it through the wall of her small bedroom. The Duke needed a wife. Petra was 19 and beautiful, and the daughter of a baron, and that was all that mattered. But the Duke did not walk past the line. He did not even look at the line. He looked past it. He looked across the whole room, over the heads of the laughing young men and the daughters of earls and the mothers with their fans. He looked at the corner where Maren was standing with her hand on her glove. He looked too long. Then he walked. He did not stop at the fireplace. He passed within an arm's length of Petra Ashford, and Petra opened her mouth to speak, and the Duke walked through the space where her words would have been, as if it were empty air. Lady Ashford's fan stopped moving. The room had not gone silent, but a pocket of silence followed the Duke as he crossed it, and it spread behind him like a wake. Maren felt her own breath stop. She thought, for a foolish and frozen second, that he was walking towards someone behind her. She turned her head. There was no one behind her. There was only the wall and the brass candle holder and the bead of wax now cool. When she turned back, he was in front of her. He smelled of cold air, as if he had just come in from outside and had not stopped to let his coat warm. He smelled of wood smoke too, and underneath that, of something like leather and something like clean linen, and something she could not name. He was a head taller than she was. He had to look down at her. He did not bow. He did not smile. "Miss Ashford," he said. He said her name the way one says a word one has been carrying in the mouth for some time. He did not make it a question. She did not curtsy. She should have. She did not. She looked up at him with her hand still on her glove, and she said, "You have the wrong Miss Ashford. They are by the fire." He did not look toward the fire. "I do not have the wrong one," he said. She took a small breath. The room around them had begun to hum. She could hear Petra's mother whispering something behind her teeth. She could feel Petra's stare like a hand on the back of her neck. She did not look at any of it. She looked at the Duke. Her chin came up 1/2 inch. "Then your Grace is mistaken about something else," she said. Her voice was low and steady. "Because we have not been introduced, and you are speaking to me as if we had been." For a moment he did nothing. Then the corner of his mouth moved. It was not a smile. It was the place where a smile would begin if he allowed it. He inclined his head just slightly. "Then I shall correct that," he said. "I am Caverly. I have heard your name spoken in this house 3 times tonight, and not once with kindness. I wish to see who deserved the unkindness." She felt the words land. She did not let her face change. "And have you decided?" "Not yet," he said. "I shall need more than a glove and a corner." He stepped back. He inclined his head again. He walked away. He did not stop at the fireplace on the way back either. He spoke to the host briefly. He left the room. The room did not go silent. The room exploded into the careful pretense that nothing had happened, which was a louder thing than silence. Petra laughed too brightly at the tall young man's next joke. Lady Ashford's fan moved with a speed that suggested she was beating something to death. Maren put her hand on the back of the chair beside her because her knees had gone strange. She did not drink the punch. She picked it up and put it back down again, just to have something to do with her hands. Her gloves did not need adjusting now. She did not have any small, private thing to do at this moment that would hide her from the room. The room was looking at her. For the first time in 5 years at Thornley, the room was looking at her, and she did not know what to do with that. She got through the rest of the evening by standing very straight and looking at the wax bead on the side table whenever she could not bear to look at anything else. When the carriages were called, she did not ride home in her uncle's. She walked the long path from the gate to the house in the dark, with a footman holding a lantern at the proper distance. Her uncle had not noticed she was missing. Her aunt had. Her aunt had said nothing. The wind off the moor was sharper now. It cut through her shawl and made her eyes water. The water on her face was the wind. She was sure of it. 2 weeks passed. In those 2 weeks she saw the Duke 3 more times, and each meeting she carried in her chest afterward, like a stone she could not put down. The first time was at the lending library in the village. She had walked the 4 miles because Lady Ashford had said the carriage was needed for Petra. The library smelled of old paper and tallow and damp wool. She was looking for a volume of essays she had read once as a girl. She turned a corner between the shelves and he was there, with a book open in his hands. He did not seem surprised to see her. She wondered later whether he had known she would come. She did not ask. He showed her the book he was reading. It was about the breeding of horses. "An unromantic subject," he said. She said, "All subjects are unromantic if one reads carefully enough." He did smile then, but only with his eyes. She walked home with the volume of essays under her arm and her cheeks burning from something that was not the wind. The second time was at church. He sat in the pew that belonged to Brindale Manor, 3 rows ahead of the Ashford pew. He did not turn around, but when the service ended and the people moved out into the churchyard, he was suddenly beside her at the gate. He asked her if she had read the essays. She said she had. He asked her which had been her favourite. She told him. He thought about it for a moment, his head tilted slightly. He said, "I would have guessed that one." She walked back up the lane with Petra hissing in her ear about how shameful it was to throw herself at a man in front of God's house, and Maren did not bother to answer. Petra did not understand. Maren had not thrown herself at anyone. She had simply been spoken to, and she had not run away. That, apparently, was throwing herself. The third time was the worst. It was at the home of Mrs. Holloway, the vicar's sister, who held small afternoons of tea and music. Maren had not wanted to go. Lady Ashford had insisted. Lady Ashford had been studying her with a new kind of attention since the night of the ball, and the attention was not warm. The Duke had been invited. Everyone in the county had been invited. The drawing room was crowded. Maren had taken a chair near the window because the window was open and the air smelled of cut grass from the lawn outside. He had crossed the room to her again in front of everyone. He had said, "May I sit?" She had said, "It is not my chair to give." He had sat anyway. They had spoken for not quite a quarter of an hour. He had asked her about her mother. She had not known how he knew her mother was dead. She had told him a little. He had listened. He had not offered comfort. He had nodded once, slowly, as if he were filing the information away to think about later. Petra had walked past them 4 times in that quarter of an hour. On the 4th pass, her sleeve had brushed Maren's teacup, and the tea had spilled across Maren's lap. It had not been an accident. The Duke had seen it not be an accident. He had not said anything, but he had stood up very slowly, and he had looked at Petra with the same look he had given the room on the night of the ball, and Petra had gone pale, and Petra had apologized in a small voice and walked away. The Duke had sat back down. He had said, "Your gown." Maren had said, "It is only tea." He had said, "It is not only tea." She had folded her hands over the stain so he could not see it. She had said in a very steady voice, "Your Grace, I do not need to be defended. I have been having tea spilled on me for 5 years." He had looked at her then in a way that she did not have a word for. He had not said anything for a long moment. Then he had said, "I see." And he had stood. And he had bowed. And he had left. That had been a week ago. Now it was the night of the Dunwell Ball. The Dunwell Ball was the largest gathering of the season. Half the county would be there. Lady Ashford had been planning Petra's gown for 2 months. Petra would wear pale yellow silk with seed pearls at the throat. Maren would wear the grey muslin she had worn last year, because Lady Ashford had said the household had spent quite enough on gowns for one daughter, and Maren had agreed without argument, because she did not wish to fight a battle she could not win. She had washed the muslin herself. She had pressed it herself. She had pinned a small piece of white ribbon at the bodice because the gown looked too plain without it. She had looked at herself in the small glass above her washstand, and she had thought, calmly, that she looked like a person who was trying not to be looked at. That was, in fact, what she had been trying for. She did not think the Duke would be at the Dunwell Ball. She had heard from the housekeeper that he had gone north on business. She had let herself feel relief about this. The relief had felt like a small dry stone in her chest, but at least it was a stone she knew the shape of. The Dunwell ballroom was very bright. There were chandeliers with what must have been 100 candles, and the heat from them pressed down from above as the heat from the fireplaces pressed in from the sides. The room smelled of beeswax and perfume and warm bodies, and the faint, sweet smell of the roses that had been cut from the conservatory and arranged in great urns by the doors. Maren stood by one of the urns. She was counting the roses. There were 19 in the urn closest to her, and one of them had a brown edge on a petal. She was looking at the brown edge when Petra and Lady Ashford came and stood next to her. Lady Ashford was smiling. Maren did not trust the smile. She had learned not to. "Maren, dear," said Lady Ashford. Her voice was low and warm and carrying. It was the voice she used when she wished to be overheard. "I must speak to you about something." Petra was smiling too. Petra's smile was tighter than her mother's. "Yes, Aunt," said Maren. "It has come to my attention," said Lady Ashford, still in that same warm, carrying voice, "that you have been encouraging the attentions of the Duke of Caverley." A pocket of quiet opened around them. The people nearby had not turned. They were too well-bred to turn, but they had stopped speaking. "I have not encouraged anything," said Maren. Her voice was steady. She had practiced steadiness in her room for 5 years. "Oh, my dear," said Lady Ashford. She put a hand on Maren's arm. The hand was cool and dry. "You must not blame yourself. You are not used to the attentions of men. You have grown up so quietly. I quite understand that when a gentleman of rank notices you, you might mistake civility for something more." Maren did not move her arm. "It is only," said Lady Ashford, "that the Duke has been speaking just this evening with my dear Petra, and it has become clear from what he has said to her that his interest in you has been of a particular nature. Charitable, you understand." The word charitable fell into the quiet like a stone into a well. "He sees in you," said Lady Ashford, "a creature of unusual modesty, a young woman in difficult circumstances. He has spoken to Petra of his wish to find some respectable situation for you, perhaps with a clergyman's family in the north, where you would be useful, where you would be among your own kind." Maren felt the room very clearly now. She felt the heat of the chandeliers. She felt the small, dry stone in her chest. She felt Petra's eyes on her, bright and watching, and Lady Ashford's hand on her arm, and the people around them not turning, and listening so hard they had stopped breathing. "How kind of His Grace," she said. "Yes," said Lady Ashford, "it is kind. He is a kind man. I told Petra she must thank him on your behalf, since you yourself might not have known how to." Maren looked at her aunt for a long moment. She looked at Petra. She did not look at the ring of listeners around them. She did not have to. She could feel them. She thought of 3 things very quickly. She thought of her mother, who had taught her to braid her own hair and to mend her own stockings, and to say nothing when there was nothing to be gained by speaking. She thought of the wax bead on the side table at Thornley, hardening into nothing. She thought of the Duke in the library, with the book about horses, saying that all subjects were unromantic if one read carefully enough. She removed her aunt's hand from her arm. She did it gently. She did not snatch it away. She lifted it as if it were a small, cold thing, and she set it back down at her aunt's side. She looked at her aunt. She said very quietly, "Then I shall write His Grace a letter of thanks tomorrow." She did not raise her voice. She did not let her face change. She turned. She walked, in her grey muslin, across the long, bright floor of the Dunwell ballroom, with her chin held at the angle her mother had taught her, and she went out through the open doors onto the terrace. The terrace was cold. The cold was a shock after the heat of the room. Her breath came out in a small white cloud, and then another. The stones under her thin slippers were damp from the evening dew, and the cold of the stones bit through the soles of her shoes and into the soles of her feet. She did not stop on the terrace. She kept walking. She went down the shallow steps to the gravel path, and then off the gravel path onto the grass of the lawn, because on the grass her shoes did not crunch and announce her. She walked until she could not see the lights of the ballroom anymore. She did not know where she was walking to. She did not have a carriage. She did not have a coat. She had 4 miles of country road between her and Thornley was not a place she wished to go. But she could not stand on the terrace where anyone might come out and find her, and she could not go back into the room. So she walked. She walked until she came to the stone wall that bounded the Dunwell garden. The wall was waist-high. She put her hand against it and she stopped. She pressed her palm flat against the stone. The stone was very cold. She pressed harder. She felt the grit of the lichen against her palm. She breathed in. She breathed out. Her breath came out white and lifted and was gone. She did not cry. She had not cried at her mother's funeral. She had not cried when her father's ship was lost. She had not cried when Petra Ashford had told her, at 13, that her mother had married down, and that was why Maren did not have a London season. She was not going to cry on the cold side of the Dunwell wall in her grey muslin with a piece of white ribbon at the bodice. She breathed in again. She breathed out. The stone bit her palm. She kept her hand there. Behind her, somewhere on the gravel path, a footstep. She did not turn. She thought it might be her aunt. She thought it might be Petra come to gloat. She thought it might be no one, that she had imagined it. She kept her hand on the stone. Miss Ashford. She closed her eyes. She had been almost sure he was in the north. She had felt safe in that almost. She did not turn around. Please go back inside, Your Grace. No. She breathed in. The cold air burned. I would prefer to be alone. I am sure you would, he said. His voice was very even. I am afraid you will not be. She heard him come closer. He did not come right up to her. He stopped a few paces away. She could smell the cold and the wood smoke and the leather of him on the night air. You did not have to follow me, she said. I did, he said. Why? There was a small silence. Then he said, because what your aunt said in there was the cruelest thing I have heard spoken in a drawing room in 15 years, and the only person in that room who behaved with any dignity at all was you, and I will not stand in a ballroom and pretend I did not see it. She did not turn around. Her hand was still on the stone. The stone was no longer cold. Her hand had warmed it. You did not need to chase me into a garden to tell me that, she said. Her voice was small. I did not chase you, he said. I followed you. There is a difference. What is the difference? I came at a respectful distance, he said, and I am prepared to leave when you tell me to. She turned her head a little. She did not look at him fully. She looked at the edge of his coat in the dark. Then I am telling you to. He did not move. Are you? She breathed in. She breathed out. She thought about the wax bead. She thought about her mother. She thought about the small dry stone in her chest, and she thought that maybe it was not a stone after all, but a held breath, a thing she had been holding for 5 years, and that maybe she could let it out, just a little, on the cold side of the Dunwell wall, and no one would know. No, she said. She did not know she was going to say it until she had said it. I am not. He came no closer, but he stayed. They stood like that for what might have been a long time. The wind came up off the moor and pressed her muslin against her legs and lifted small strands of her hair from where the pins held them. She did not turn around. He did not speak. She could hear him breathing. She could hear her own. After a while she said, What I do not understand is why you spoke to Petra at all this evening, about me, to say what she says you said. I did not. She turned her head a little more. You did not? I did not speak to your cousin this evening about you. I did not speak to your cousin this evening at all. She has been trying to position herself near my elbow since the moment I came into the room, and I have been moving accordingly. Maren let out a breath that was not quite a laugh. There was no shape in it. Then she made it up. She made it up. In front of 40 people. In front of 40 people. She closed her eyes. She put her forehead against the stone. The stone was cold against her brow, and it felt good, the cold, because it was a true thing in a night of false things. "Your Grace," she said, "I do not know what to do." "You do not have to do anything tonight," he said. "You walked out of the room with your back straight. That was the doing. The rest can wait until morning." She did not answer. After a moment she heard him take off his coat. She heard the rustle of it. She heard him come a step closer, and he laid the coat over the wall beside her hand. He did not put it on her shoulders. He laid it on the wall. Then he stepped back. "You are cold," he said. "It is there if you want it." She did not pick it up at once. She kept her forehead on the stone. Then, after a minute, she straightened. She lifted the coat. It was heavy. It was warm from him. It smelled of him, of the cold and the wood smoke and the thing she could not name. She put it on. Her hands disappeared into the sleeves. He did not laugh at her for being too small inside his coat. He did not comment on it at all. "I will walk you back to the house," he said. "I am not going back into the house." "I did not say to the ballroom," he said. "I said to the house. There is a small side room. Mrs. Dunwell uses it for the ladies who feel unwell. I have already spoken to her. She is sending for a carriage. You will wait there. You will be driven home. You will not go through the ballroom." She looked at him properly then for the first time since he had come up behind her. His face was half in shadow. The line of his jaw was hard. His eyes were not. "You have already done all that," she said slowly. "I had it done before I came out to find you." She did not know what to say to that. She did not say anything. She walked beside him back along the gravel path, and at the side door of the house, Mrs. Dunwell was waiting with a face full of careful kindness, and Maron was put into a small room with a fire and a blanket and a cup of tea that she did not drink, and the Duke bowed to her at the door and said, "I will call tomorrow." And then he was gone. She rode home in the Dunwell carriage. The Dunwell footman did not know what had happened, and he was very polite. She gave him back the coat at the door of Thornley and asked him to return it to his Grace with her thanks. She did not keep it. She would not give Petra Ashford the chance to see her cousin walking into the house wearing the Duke of Caverley's coat. She had not survived 5 years at Thornley by being a fool. She did not sleep. She sat by her window in her shift with a shawl around her shoulders, and she watched the moor turn from black to grey to a thin, watery pink, and she thought. She thought about what her aunt had said, and what her cousin had done, and what the Duke had not said. She thought about the small, dry stone in her chest, which was a little softer now, a little smaller. She thought about what she was going to do. By the time the maid came in to lay the morning fire, she had decided. She wrote 2 letters before breakfast. The first was to a Mrs. Pelham, a widow who lived in a small house in the next village. Mrs. Pelham had been her mother's closest friend. Mrs. Pelham had once said, at the funeral, that if ever Maron needed a place to come to, the door was open. Maron had been 13 then. She had remembered the words for 9 years. She wrote and asked Mrs. Pelham if the door was still open, and if it would be possible to come today. The second letter was to her uncle. It said that she was grateful for the home she had been given at Thornley, that she would not forget the kindness, that she had received an invitation from Mrs. Pelham, which she would be accepting, and that she would send word for her trunk in a week. She did not write to her aunt. She did not write to Petra. She gave both letters to the boy who carried letters in the village, and she went back upstairs, and she packed the things she could carry herself in one valise. By noon, she was in the kitchen garden waiting for the answer from Mrs. Pelham. The answer came at 2. The door was still open. Mrs. Pelham would send her own pony cart for Maron at 4. Lady Ashford came to find her at 3:30. Lady Ashford had heard. The kitchen had heard, and from the kitchen everyone always heard. Lady Ashford's face was white around the mouth. "You will not," she said, in a low, hissing voice in the corner of the kitchen garden, "embarrass this family by running off to a vicar's widow because you took a fit of pride at a ball." Maron looked at her aunt. She looked at her aunt for a long time without speaking. Her aunt was a small woman, she realized for the first time. She had spent 5 years believing her aunt was a great looming thing, and her aunt was a small woman with a thin mouth and dry hands and afraid of the wrong things. "I am not embarrassing the family, Aunt," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "I am leaving it." She picked up her valise. She walked through the garden gate. She did not look back. Mrs. Pelham's house was small. It smelled of lavender and beeswax and old books. There were 3 rooms on the ground floor and 3 rooms above. Mrs. Pelham was a thin, brown, calm woman who had been the wife of a country vicar for 30 years and was now alone in the house with a single maid and a cat. The cat was a large grey creature with one torn ear. The cat looked at Maren when she came in, and the cat blinked once, slowly, and then went back to sleep on the hearthrug. Mrs. Pelham showed Maren to a small room at the back of the house. The window looked out over a square of garden with a pear tree in it. "It is plain, my dear," said Mrs. Pelham, "but it is yours for as long as you wish it." Maren sat down on the edge of the narrow bed. The bedspread was a white, knitted thing, very clean. She put her hands in her lap. She said, "I do not have any money, Mrs. Pelham. I am not asking for any. I will earn what I cost you. I can sew. I can read aloud. I can keep accounts. I have kept the household accounts at Thornley for 3 years. My aunt did not like to do them." "Tomorrow, my dear," said Mrs. Pelham. "Tonight you will eat a piece of bread and drink a cup of milk, and you will sleep." She slept. She had not expected to. She slept like a stone in a riverbed, and when she woke in the morning the grey cat was on the foot of her bed, looking at her with a calm consideration, and she had not dreamed at all. The Duke called at Thornley that morning. She did not learn this until later, from the boy who carried letters, who had heard it from the cook at Thornley, who had heard it from the parlour-maid. The Duke had been told, by Lady Ashford, that Miss Maren Ashford was unwell and could not receive visitors. The Duke had asked when she would be able to receive visitors. Lady Ashford had said, with the warmth of someone offering a kindness, that perhaps Miss Ashford would write his grace when she felt able. The Duke had stood in the hall of Thornley for some time without speaking. Then he had bowed, and he had said, "I will return." Then he had left. He did not return to Thornley. He did not need to. He had found Mrs. Pelham's house by the 2nd afternoon. Maren did not know how he had found it. She suspected later that he had simply asked. He had asked at the village, and someone had told him. He was that kind of man. He did not need to be clever about it. She was in the front room of Mrs. Pelham's small house, mending a tear in the elbow of one of Mrs. Pelham's day dresses, when the knock came. Mrs. Pelham went to the door. There was a quiet exchange. Then Mrs. Pelham came back into the front room. Her face was the same as it always was, calm and brown, and a little amused. "My dear," she said, "His Grace the Duke of Caverley has come to call on you." Maren did not look up from the dress. She made one more stitch. She knotted the thread. She bit the thread off with her teeth because there were no scissors on the table beside her, and then she set the dress aside, and she stood up. She smoothed her grey muslin. Her hands were shaking slightly. She let them. "Mrs. Pelham," she said, "would you stay?" "If you wish, my dear." "I wish." Mrs. Pelham showed the Duke in. He looked too large for the room. His head almost touched the lintel of the door. He stopped just inside and he looked at Maren, and he did not say anything for a moment. Then he bowed. He bowed properly this time, not the half-inclination of the head at the ball, a full, careful bow. "Miss Ashford." "Your Grace." Mrs. Pelham, with a kindness that Maren did not forget for the rest of her life, said, "I shall be in the kitchen, my dears, and I shall hear nothing." She went out. She left the door open. The Duke noticed the open door and did not move to close it. "Will you sit?" said Maren. He sat. The chair was small and he was not. He looked very plainly uncomfortable, and yet he did not look like a man who would rather have been anywhere else. "You called at Thornley," she said. I did. My aunt told you I was unwell. She did. I am not unwell. I have left Thornley. I see that. A small silence. Your Grace, she said. She did not sit down. She stood by the window with her hand on the back of a wooden chair. I would like to ask you a question. Ask it. Why did you come up to me at the Dunwell ball that night? Why did you follow me out? You knew before that night that you would do this. He did not answer for a moment. He was looking at her very steadily, and she had the impression that he was deciding not whether to answer, but how to answer, with what economy of words. I have been a duke for 9 years, he said. Before that I was a soldier. Before that I was a younger son who did not expect to inherit. My brother died of a fever in Lisbon. I came home. I did not want the title. I took it because there was no one else. Since I took it, I have been pursued, with no small persistence, by women I did not know, and by their mothers, who I knew rather better, and by their fathers, who wished to know me. I have learned to walk into a room and to see the line of women who have been arranged for me before I see anything else. I see the line first. I see everything else second. I came into the room at Thornley Hall that night, and I saw the line by the fireplace, the way I always do. And then I saw you. You were not in the line. You were not trying to be in the line. You were looking at a piece of wax on a side table as if it were the only honest thing in the room. I thought, that is the only honest thing in the room. And so I crossed to it. He stopped. He looked at his hands. That was not a romantic answer, he said. I am aware. I was not raised to give romantic answers. I have not been in the habit of giving any answers at all. She had her hand pressed very flat against the back of the chair. And tonight, she said, I mean the night of the Dunwell ball, when you followed me. That was simpler, he said. I had been listening to your aunt for as long as she had been speaking. I had been watching your face. You did not change your face. I knew, watching you, that you were not going to argue with her, because you were not going to give her the pleasure. I knew you would leave. I waited until you left. Then I waited a minute longer, because I did not want to crowd you. Then I came out. You did not come out to rescue me. No, he said. I came out because I wanted to know whether you were all right, and I did not trust anyone else in that house to find out. She let out a slow breath. It made a small mist in the cold light from the window. The fire in Mrs. Pelham's small grate was low. She had not noticed how cold the room was. She noticed now. Your Grace, she said, I cannot marry you. He looked up. I cannot marry you, she said again, because saying it once had been hard, and saying it twice was somehow easier. I have nothing. I have no dowry. I have no name worth carrying. I have one good gown and a piece of white ribbon. If you marry me, every drawing room in the county will say what my aunt said in that ballroom, and they will say it for the rest of my life. They will say you took me out of charity. They will say it of our children. I cannot live in a house where I am a charity, and I cannot ask you to live in a house where your wife is. She stopped. She breathed. He did not speak at once. When he spoke, he said, Have I asked you to marry me? She felt her face go hot. She opened her mouth. She shut it. I did not mean, she said. I did not assume. I have not asked you to marry me, he said. I had no intention of asking you to marry me today. I came to ask you whether you were well, and to find out where you would be living, and to ask whether you would permit me to call on you here, with Mrs. Pelham's permission, in the proper way, for as long as it took for both of us to decide whether we wished anything more. I had thought a month, possibly 2. I had not thought to spring the question on you in a parlour on the 3rd day after a public humiliation. I am not a young man, Miss Ashford. I am not in a great hurry. She put her hand over her mouth. She had not laughed in 2 weeks. She laughed now. It was a small laugh, and it came out a little broken, but it was a laugh. She sat down finally in the chair beside the window. She put her face in her hands for one short second, and then she took her hands away. "I am sorry," she said. "I have been thinking about it so much that I assumed you had been too." "I have been thinking about it," he said. The line of his mouth was very slightly amused. "But I had not arrived at the parlor stage." "Then I am sorry I jumped ahead." "You have not jumped anywhere I do not intend to follow." She looked at him. He looked at her. The small clock on Mrs. Pelham's mantel ticked. Outside in the lane, a cart went by, and the horse's hooves were soft on the wet road. The room smelled of beeswax and ink and old wool and the faint smoke of the small fire. There was a slow moment in which neither of them said anything, and neither of them looked away. She felt the moment stretch. She felt it become a thing she would remember. She felt the heat come back into her hands, which had been cold for 3 days. "All right," she said quietly. "Then you may call on me, with Mrs. Pelham's permission, in the proper way." "Thank you." "It is I who should thank you." "For what?" "For not letting me stand at that wall alone." He did not answer that. He stood. He bowed again, the same careful bow. He looked at her for one more long moment. Then he turned and went out, and she heard him speak to Mrs. Pelham in the hall, and she heard the door open and shut, and she heard his horse on the lane outside, and then the lane was quiet. She sat by the window. The grey cat came and sat at her feet and looked up at her with calm, yellow eyes, and after a while she reached down and put her hand on its head, and the cat closed its eyes and was still. He called the next week. He called the week after. He came on Tuesdays at 3, and he stayed an hour, and Mrs. Pelham sat in the corner with her mending and pretended to be deaf. They talked about the kinds of things people talk about when they are getting to know one another and are not in a hurry. Books, the weather, the planting of pear trees, a horse he had bought that he was not sure of, an essay she had read. He told her about his brother who had died of fever in Lisbon. She told him about her mother. He listened more than he spoke. When he spoke, he said what he meant. He did not flatter her. He never, in those weeks, said she was pretty. He did say once that her hair caught the light from the window in a way he had been noticing. She had laughed at him for that. He had taken it well. In the 3rd week of his calling, something happened that she did not learn about for some time. Mrs. Pelham's roof had begun to leak. It had been leaking for 2 years, in fact, in the small room above the kitchen, and Mrs. Pelham had been catching the drips in a tin basin and not mentioning it to anyone. One afternoon when Mrs. Pelham was in town, 2 men arrived at the house with ladders and tiles and a written authorization from a slater in the next county. They climbed onto the roof and they spent the day mending it. They would not say who had sent them. They said only that it had been paid for and that no thanks were necessary. When Mrs. Pelham came home and found the roof half mended and the men eating bread and cheese in her kitchen, she asked them 5 different ways who had paid them, and they would not say. The next week, she asked the slater himself, who was an old friend of her late husband's, and the slater, after some pressing, said that a gentleman had ridden over one morning and asked him whether he knew the cottage of a Mrs. Pelham and whether the roof was in good order. And when the slater said no, the gentleman had given him money, in coin, and told him to mend it and to mention his name to no one. Mrs. Pelham told Marin this in her quiet voice 3 weeks later, after the Duke had been calling for 2 months. Mrs. Pelham said, "He did not want me to know, my dear. He did not want you to know. I am telling you because I think you ought to know, and I do not believe he ought to be the only one in this house who decides what is told." Marin did not say anything for a long time. She was sitting at the little table in the front room with a piece of plain sewing in her hands, and she set the sewing down very carefully. She put both her hands flat on the table. She looked at her hands. She thought of him riding over to the Slaters in the rain in October. She thought of him handing over coin in a slater's yard and saying nothing about it. She thought of the tin basin in the small room above Mrs. Pelham's kitchen. She thought of how Mrs. Pelham had taken her in with nothing on the 3rd day of November, when she had no other place to go. "He did this," she said, "for Mrs. Pelham." "He did this for me," said Mrs. Pelham, because I took in a young woman he had decided was worth taking in. He did not do it for show. He did not do it to win you. He did it because the roof was leaking and an old woman was catching the rain in a tin basin, and he had money, and he could mend it. That is the kind of man he is. I thought you should know." Maren did not answer. She picked up her sewing again. She made 3 small stitches that were not very good. She had to take them out later. But in that moment, in Mrs. Pelham's front room, with the small fire and the grey cat and the smell of beeswax, something inside her chest that had been the small dry stone for many years was now not a stone at all. It was something warm. It was something with a shape she did not yet have a word for. He continued to call. November turned to December. The frost came hard in the second week, and the moor turned white, and the lanes were rutted with ice. He rode over in all weather. He brought her a book once, a small book of essays bound in green cloth, and he gave it to her without comment, and she opened it on her lap that night by the fire and found on the 3rd page a small mark beside one paragraph, in pencil, in a small, careful hand. The paragraph was about the kind of courage that does not look like courage from the outside. He had marked the paragraph, and he had not mentioned it. She did not mention it either. But she read the paragraph many times. In the first week of January, an invitation came to Mrs. Pelham's small house. It was from Lady Dunwell. It was for a small gathering at Dunwell Hall, an evening of music, on the 20th of the month. Maren had not been to Dunwell Hall since the night of the ball. She had not been to any gathering in the county since the night of the ball. She had not gone to church in the village because the village church was where the Ashfords sat. She had walked on Sundays 4 miles to the next village, where no one knew her name. The invitation said, "Mrs. Pelham, and Miss Ashford, if she would be so kind." The "if she would be so kind" was written in Lady Dunwell's own hand. Underneath, in a separate line, "His Grace will be present." Maren read the invitation twice. She put it on the mantel. She did not pick it up again for a day. The next morning, after she had risen and dressed and had her tea, she picked it up again. She took it to Mrs. Pelham. "I think we should go," she said. Mrs. Pelham looked at her for a long moment, the way Mrs. Pelham looked at things, calmly, without hurry. "Are you sure, my dear?" "No," said Maren, "but I think we should go." She wore the grey muslin. She had no other gown. She washed it again and pressed it again and put the same small piece of white ribbon at the bodice. Mrs. Pelham, who had a stored chest of things from her younger days, lent her a shawl of fine, soft wool the colour of cream, and Maren wrapped it around her shoulders and felt warmer than she had felt in weeks. The Dunwell drawing-room was full of candles, but it was not as bright as the night of the ball, and it was not as crowded. There were perhaps 30 people. Maren stepped through the door with Mrs. Pelham on her arm, and the conversation in the room did not stop, but it slowed. Heads turned. She saw very quickly the faces she knew. Lady Ashford was across the room by the pianoforte. Petra Ashford was next to her mother. Petra was wearing pale yellow silk again. Petra's face went still when she saw Maren. Maren did not look at Petra for long. She looked instead at Mrs. Dunwell, who came across the room to greet them, and who took Maren's hand in both of hers, and who said, "I am so very glad you came, my dear." She said it loud enough to be heard. The Duke was by the long window at the far end of the room. He was talking to an older gentleman Maren did not know. He looked up when she came in. He did not smile, but he excused himself from the older gentleman with a brief word, and he crossed the room. He did not cross the room slowly. He did not cross the room in a way that drew attention. He simply crossed it. He stopped in front of her. He bowed. "Miss Ashford." "Your Grace." "You came." "I came." He looked at her for a moment. Then he turned and he offered her his arm. He did not offer it dramatically. He offered it the way one offers an arm in the most natural thing in the world. She took it. She put her hand on the dark sleeve of his coat. She felt the warmth of him under her hand. The room around them was watching. The room around them was holding its breath. She did not look at the room. He walked her very calmly around the edge of the gathering. He did not walk her to the pianoforte. He did not parade her. He walked her to where Lady Dunwell was sitting, and Lady Dunwell said something kind, and the Duke said something pleasant in return, and then he walked Marin back to a small sofa by the fire. He sat her down. He sat himself down on a chair beside her, neither too close nor too far. He turned slightly toward her. He spoke to her in a low, even voice about the music that was about to begin. Across the room, Lady Ashford's face had gone the colour of paper. Petra had set her glass down too hard on the little table beside her, and the glass had rung against the wood. Nobody else in the room appeared to have noticed. Everybody else in the room had noticed. It was at that moment, while the first young woman was beginning to play a soft thing on the pianoforte, that the Duke said quietly to Marin, without looking at the room, "When I came to call at Thornley Hall, the morning after the Dunwell ball, your aunt told me you were unwell. I have not spoken to her since that morning. I am not going to speak to her tonight. I do not require an apology from her. I require nothing from her at all. But I want you to know, and I want her to see, that I have come this evening for the express purpose of being seen with you in the same room where, the last time you stood in such a room, she made you a public thing to be discussed." Marin's hand was very still in her lap. "I did not come here to make a scene," he said. "I came here to make a fact." She looked at him. She did not speak. "You do not have to say anything," he said. "I am not going to," she said. Her voice was very steady. He inclined his head. He turned back toward the pianoforte. He listened to the music. He did not touch her hand. He did not need to. The room did the rest. Later, when the music had ended and the company was drinking small glasses of cordial and eating little cakes, Lady Ashford crossed the room to Marin. She did not have a choice. The pressure of the room had compelled her. Lady Ashford's smile was the same warm, carrying smile she had used at the ball. The Duke was standing just behind Marin's right shoulder. He did not move when Lady Ashford approached. He did not speak. "Marin, my dear," said Lady Ashford, "how well you are looking." "Thank you, Aunt." "It is so good to see you out among friends." "Thank you, Aunt. Your uncle and I have so missed you at Thornley." Marin looked at her aunt. The room was listening. She felt the Duke behind her shoulder, not moving, not breathing too loudly, simply being there. She did not raise her voice. She did not let her face change. She said, "I shall send for my trunk on Friday, Aunt. I have written you about it twice. The boy will come at noon. Please have it ready." Lady Ashford's mouth opened. Then it shut. She nodded once. She inclined her head. She walked away. The room exhaled very quietly, all at once. Mrs. Pelham, on the other side of the room, sipped her cordial and looked at the carpet, and her face did not change at all. But Marin, who had known her now for 2.5 months, knew that the face that did not change was a face that was, somewhere underneath, profoundly amused. The carriage came at 10:30 to take Mrs. Pelham and Marin home. The Duke walked them out. He helped Mrs. Pelham in first. Then he held his hand for Marin. She put her gloved hand in his bare one. She looked up at him. The carriage lantern was lit, and his face was in its small yellow light. His eyes were not cold. They had never been cold. She had not understood for many weeks what they were. She understood now. She did not get into the carriage at once. She held his hand a moment longer than was needed. She felt him not pull away. She said in a voice low enough that only he could hear, "Your Grace." "Yes. Thank you for the roof." There was a long silence. The lantern hissed softly. The horses shifted in their harness. Somewhere in the trees an owl made one small sound and was still. "She told you," he said. "She did. I had asked her not to." "I know. She told me anyway." His mouth moved. It was not a smile. It was the place where a smile would begin if he allowed it. "I see," he said. "I am glad she told me." "Are you?" "I am." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he raised her hand very carefully, and he turned it, and he pressed his mouth very briefly to the back of her glove. He did not say anything. He helped her into the carriage. He closed the door. The carriage moved. Mrs. Pelham, in the dark, did not say a word the whole way home. At the door of her small house, she patted Maren's cheek once, very lightly, and went up to her bed. The grey cat came out of the kitchen and rubbed against Maren's ankle. Maren sat down by the kitchen fire and put her hand on the cat's head. She sat for a long time. She did not think about very much. She did not need to. The thing in her chest that had been a stone for many years had turned, somewhere over the last several weeks, into a small, warm, steady thing she now had a word for. The word was not love. Not quite, not yet. The word for the moment was home. The other word would come. 1 year later, on a bright, cold morning in early January, the grey cat sat on the window ledge of the breakfast room at Brindale Manor and looked out at the lawn. The lawn had frost on it, and a single magpie was walking across the frost. Inside the breakfast room, a fire burned high in the grate. The room smelled of fresh bread and bacon, and the small bowl of dried lavender that Maren had put on the sideboard because she liked the smell of it in the morning. She sat at one end of the table. He sat at the other. She had a letter from Mrs. Pelham open beside her plate. He had the morning's papers folded next to his cup. Neither of them was reading. They were eating. They were warm. He had not pushed his hair back from his brow that morning either, and it had fallen across his face the way it had the first night she had seen him, in the doorway of the drawing-room at Thornley Hall. She looked at him. He looked up from his cup. He did not say anything. She did not say anything. He reached across the table slowly, and he closed his hand over hers where it lay on the white cloth beside her plate. She turned her hand under his, palm up, and let him hold it. The magpie on the lawn lifted into the air and was gone. She picked up her tea with her other hand. She drank it. The tea was hot. The room was warm. The cat on the window ledge began, very softly, to purr. "Thank you for staying with this